In this book, Bob Hughes, Evolutionary Playwork, describes his playing when he was little. And he talks about mucking around in the fields and making dens and damming streams and setting fire to cornfields and climbing trees, which he wasn't very good at. But he did all this most of his childhood, mucking about with his friends. Then he went on to manage an adventure playground, and him and the children were building big structures. And someone said to him, "Bob, what are the tall structures for?" And he sort of looked, said, "Oh, well, they're for trees." Because as he looked out over the landscape from these tall structures that he could see, he saw the houses that the children were living in. And he realised that those houses were built on the land where he and his friends had played, digging and damming streams, setting fire to cornfields and climbing trees. So he started thinking about play in terms of a compensatory environment, which is a polite way of saying, "Oh, sorry kids, we really messed up, but we'll give you an adventure playground." The adventure playground movement itself built on the collective efforts of communities and various organisations, including Lady Allen of Hertwood. And they were part of the post-war reconstruction, not only of the fabric of London in this instance, but of the communities, because homes had been bombed out. Homes where our families and our neighbours had lived and died had gone. So children were playing on those empty spaces, so they became formalised into adventure playgrounds. And children built on them because there was loads of wood to build with. So what started out as community action ended up as a community of players with children subtly supported by adults. Playwork is probably the biggest legacy to come out of adventure playgrounds. Its name tells you what we do. We work with play. And we describe play as freely chosen, personally directed, and intrinsically motivated, with children in control of the content and intent of their playing. So play is of necessity child-led. Now, as playworkers, we've studied play so that we know how to best provide for it for children. And one of the studies has showed that there are universally, all over the world, we can find 16 different types of playing thereabouts. They're all very different, and only one of them is totally focused on locomotor skills, movement in 3 dimensions. You can think of these play types as a sort of smorgasbord or a buffet of with different flavours and textures and colours and smells and tastes and nutritional values and combinations of putting these things together. It's quite a nice way to think of play types. An excellent adventure playground should be a Gesamtkunstwerk, which means a total artwork. So if the play equivalent of an artwork that works in all different dimensions, all different media. And it should be there to satisfy the play appetite of any child, at any time. Now, playworkers don't adulterate the play process, but they're there to hold the environment, to hold that setting, and they do that through their own practice, and they do it with the children. So the children and the play workers are there creating the space together to meet their play needs. Play workers are the only workforce that seek to have a horizontal power relationship with children. We're there to be at the service of play and to learn from children. An adventure playground is where the physical becomes the psychological, Playwork requires us constantly to review and reflect on how the environment is working to meet the play needs of children. Playwork can happen anywhere, but adventure playgrounds can only be run by playworkers. So, adventure playgrounds are free. Play is a human right, not a commercial transaction. Adventure playgrounds are designed by children's play, and they're higgledy-piggledy and a bit of a mess and cobbled together and quirky and an ever-changing process and never finished and breathtaking. They need adequate funding, and that funding should reflect an understanding that play is a biological imperative for young humans and is probably more important than education. Adventure playgrounds are places that need full-time, well-paid playwork teams to maximise their use and have time to reflect and develop the whole work of the site. They need management and support working to the playwork principles, resourcing playworkers to fulfil both the physical and psychological roles required of them. They're not simply Heath Robinson feature of a cityscape, any more than Oxford is simply a collection of dreaming spires. They can't be bought from a catalogue. They're not theme parks, and they're not big fixed structure features of parks. They're not for sale, and they're not for profit. They're not the only place where play can happen, but they're a very vibrant part of a local play offer. Or they can be. Play is a necessity. Adventure playgrounds are a luxury. A community can cope without an adventure playground, but coping isn't the same as thriving. Adventure playgrounds are both really, really simple and really, really complicated, and they're as exasperating as trying to lasso the clouds or pin jelly to the ceiling. And they're the most wonderful, inspirational, and life-affirming places you'll ever find.
So I'd like to ask Chris.
Oh my gosh, I don't want to go after Penny. That was beautiful. Beautifully written and beautifully said. Well, basically, I've come here to speak to you about my experience at Deptford Adventure Playground. So I grew up in the 80s in Deptford. So growing up in the 80s in Deptford, being Vietnamese, not Chinese, I'm half and half, but more Vietnamese, because I speak Vietnamese at home with my parents. It was like very, very scary, because A, there's no other Vietnamese families in the early 80s in Deptford. And B, I was born here, so like, I didn't realise that I was actually Vietnamese. I just thought I was like everyone else. It was very Millwall-ish, so you'd get like a lot of, going down Deptford Market, like a lot of kind of like racist or ignorant comments towards me and my mum, like her with a little shopping trolley and me walking about with her and stuff like that. It was like, it weren't the greatest upbringing ever, but it was my upbringing living in Deptford. So I went to school just past the adventure playground, and my house was here. So it was my house, the adventure playground, and my school. And when I was old enough to start walking home from school by myself, I used to sneak into the adventure playground on my way home, because I was waiting, like looking at this amazing place, looking from the kind of like bedroom of my flats, seeing all the kids play and play football and stuff like that. I was like waiting for my chance to go to the adventure playground. So my parents being strict, kind of like Asian parents that couldn't speak any English, like to keep me kind of like safe at home. So as soon as I could, I'd like go in there, and it would literally be like 15 minutes, run in, like hi to the workers, swing on the ropes loads. Like my friend Darren, he used to like pee in the bushes because we were scared to go into like the hot bit, because it's where all grown up kids were, and we were just primary school kids going in there for 10 minutes at a time. So that was like my first experience of the adventure playground. And like, you know, the adults there, like, I don't even know what it was. The adults there, like, would try and engage for like the 10 minutes that we were there. And it kind of built up after a while that I got to know the adults. So I got more confident. And then like, when my mum let me out to play in the park, I'd sneak off from the park that was in front of my flats, which was really silly because my mum could see if I was in the park or not, and go across the road to the adventure playground instead. And then you'd get my big brother kind of like dragging me home from the adventure playground because my mum knew that I was there. But that was kind of like me growing up. So when I went to secondary school and I was a little bit older and had that little bit more freedom, I used to lie and say I was going after school club and sneak to the adventure playground. And it was just amazing. It was like getting to know all the young people, getting to know the staff, like swinging on ropes, going inside, playing pool, learning how to play pool, learning how to do like arts and crafts, because like my family didn't have money for like arts and crafts. They didn't have no spare money for that. They was like doing food banks and everything. So that supplied me with tools to have a childhood like every other young person that was going to school with me, where I could like paint, colour in and stuff like that, and do like all these amazing things that other young people had but I didn't have. So that was my experience of kind of like growing up in the adventure playground. Like what made me sad was stuff like trips, because they used to have like during the 80s and 90s they used to have loads of trips because we had money in adventure playgrounds. So they used to go ice skating, they used to do residentials and stuff like that. So I was never allowed to go on them because I wasn't even supposed to be at the adventure playground. So when I turned about 18, I had like a really great relationship with the senior there, who was called Richard McVicar. So he said to me, do you want to volunteer on these trips for Macaroni Woods? And I was like, yes, because I've never been there and I've always wanted to go there. I was 18 at the time, like going into university, but it was something that I really wanted to do. So I used to do residential trips about 3 times a year, a week in the summer and 2 like spring and autumn or winter. And the trips kind of like made me fall in love with youth work in a way, but I didn't take it seriously until kind of like in my 20s. During 2000, I worked as an administrator for lots of plumbing companies. For whatever reason, I was doing that. And I kept on getting made redundant because companies kept on going under. So I was speaking to Mac, who I was still in contact with at the time. And Mac was like, so-and-so's on maternity, do you want to work here for the summer? Just because basically you need a job. You can just work here whilst you're looking. So I spent the summer there, and 13 years later, I haven't left Deptford Adventure Playground because like it's the most rewarding, kind of like inspiring job where you're constantly learning and constantly like just feeling like you're making a difference in little ways and big ways as well. And it's an amazing job, like play work to do. So that's how I got into play work. So like I say, I worked at Deptford Adventure Playground. Deptford Adventure Playground, a little bit of history. It originally the site was a slaughterhouse during the 1880s where live cattle was brought there to be slaughtered. And then because Convoy's Wharf is right next to it, so they come from Convoy's Wharf from the boats into the playground to get slaughtered. But then during the 1890s, frozen animals used to get shipped. So they didn't use it as a slaughterhouse anymore because it was cheaper to ship frozen animals. So in the 1920s, it became the site for Kentish Premier Dairies. And even now, if you dig deep enough, you can find like the little milk bottle tops from there. And that's why it got its nickname, the Kennedy, from Kentish Premier. So like you were saying, after the war, the dairy farm, the dairy place got like totaled in the war, and so the site was used by the young people like as a junk playground and stuff, and then it was used as a 1 o'clock club for babies and toddlers. And then in the 1963, Greater London Council made it into an adventure playground. It was the second playground established in London. White City was the first. And at that point, there was 5 full-time workers and 2 part-time workers. It was opened 5 days a week, 11 until 7, so that's 40 hours of face-to-face time that young people will be able to access. Today, we do 7.5 hours face-to-face time, and that's over 2 days a week because of the cuts we had from Lewisham. Deptford is lucky because we've got hours as youth club hours, because Riverside Youth Club is being rebuilt at the moment, so we got their hours. If we were an adventure playground like Home Park, the Dumps, or Honour Oak Adventure Playgrounds, we'd only be getting 5 hours face-to-face time a week. So we've got extra hours because we're seen as the youth club because we've got their hours. Ladywell Adventure Playground has totally been closed down, which is really sad because their building, when they first built, it was a container, their building. And the container over the last 10 odd years or whatever has just gone into disrepair. It's got black mould, leaks everywhere. It's really dangerous for electrics. So the whole playground got closed down because there's just no money to fund a new kind of site. But yeah, the reason why adventure playgrounds are important is because it gives young people childhoods. What is more important than giving a young person a childhood? And yeah.
So, because you're all experts in adventure play, I thought I would talk about what I am more knowledge about, which is writing about play. And I thought if I shared a little bit about some of the reporting I've done that has been successful and has had impact, it might give people ideas or think of ways to move forward, because we are at a critical time when play provision is being lost forever, because it's hard enough to keep it open. I'm sure you'd agree that once it's shut, it's almost impossible to get it going again. And this managed decline, which I think is what's happening in Lewisham. The Ladywell site, why was that allowed to fall apart like that? And then once you've had it shut because of repairs, no one notices because the children are no longer using that site. Parents don't have a relationship with it. There's no emotion in the community. As a parent in Lewisham, when I was trying to tell other parents about the Honour Oak Adventure Playground and saying, look at it, it's an absolutely beautiful site and it's locked all the time, and people say, oh, it's always been locked. So I don't remember it ever being open, and it's just this depressing lack of interest because there isn't that connection anyway. So until a few years ago, when I had children 5 or 6 years ago, I was a human rights journalist, and I used to write about refugees and migration and really serious, depressing things. And then I sparked by having my own children and started to become interested in play. I went to Leicester and I wrote about the Highfields Adventure Playground in Leicester, and my mind was blown by this space that was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and everything about it had a huge impact on me, not just what a fantastic space it was, but the absolute tragedy that they were fighting for their lives, despite providing such a fantastic service for local children. I then wanted to follow that up and write more about adventure play, and I was pestering an editor at The Guardian saying I want to write about, actually Tottenham, wanted to write about the adventure playground in Tottenham, and he said, oh well, we've done that now. I was like, tick, we've moved on, written about adventure play. And he said, but I've been getting these emails, these people in this estate who are like, saying something's happening about play, why don't you go and see them instead? So I went to the Lillian Bayliss estate where Louise lives, and she said, there's this terrible situation here. We were all told this would be a child-friendly place to live. These beautiful brochures with these children playing, as developers like to do. They're probably doing that over there on that estate. But actually, when people moved in, the children were treated as though their behaviour was completely unacceptable just for using the space. And there was this sort of battle going on over that was really unpleasant for all the families. But also what Louise discovered while she was out there trying to speak up for children was that the social housing residents had been banned from using the playgrounds on the estate and had been told only people who own their homes can play here, you guys over there, and they literally got this rotten little play strip for the council housing, and this quite new development. And I wrote about it, and I remember thinking, oh, I hope it goes in the paper, you know, I hope it gets a little bit of attention, and because you always worry when you write about people that whether it will have any impact at all. And then I woke up and Louise had sent me a text. She was like, oh my God, it's going crazy here. And they've got breakfast TV were there, and the story had just gone completely viral, literally overnight. So it had gone up on the Guardian's website in the evening. And by the next morning, Jeremy Corbyn was tweeting saying, this is a disgrace. And Russia TV, I think, turned up on the lawn. And when I went later that day, there was sort of Daily Mail journalists trying to climb over fences and get this like pictures of this terrible injustice. And I think what happened is it really touched something for people who've just had enough of how children are treated. So it became a focal point for a lot of people's sadness about how children live in our society and how little access they have to space. And I think it can feel very overwhelming trying to fight to keep youth services going, try to stop cars taking over residential streets. And when you have something very clearly unjust, it's easy to focus on it. And I think within a week they'd symbolically knocked down this wall with a hammer, and they'd said everyone could play there. And then we found more estates were doing exactly the same thing. It was going on quite deliberately with developers in London. And the mayor, Sadiq Khan, then said, right, it's banned, and it's going to be written in, and it is now written in to new housing plans. There will be no segregation of play space by tenure. I don't know whether it's made a wider difference, because the deeper issue that Louise wanted attention on, that children's play is not acceptable to people anymore, has not been challenged, sadly, and is rotting away in society. And possibly with the social housing issue, developers lobby now to just remove the social housing and probably build it somewhere else, so they don't even have to deal with the segregation issue. But it did raise the issue of children, and I think shows that people do really care about play, and it's emotional. Everyone was a child, even if they don't like the sound of children playing now, or they haven't had children. They will remember playing. And I've since done other reporting, at the moment writing for the Guardian's Environment Desk about doorstep spaces, and through that we did a call out, do your children face barriers to play, and we had over 200 replies, lots very detailed. People, again, I felt this very strong emotion coming from people. They want to talk about it, they know it's wrong, they don't know what to do. One of the questions we asked was, are you trying to do anything to help children play? And lots of people said, I wish I knew what to do. I don't know what to do. So I suppose to sum it up, what I'd say is I think people should try and think about capturing the imagination of all those people that do really care. The adventure play issue needs a campaign, I think, for adventure play. I know there's London Play and I know there's Play England, but I think something really focused on adventure play. That's what I said.
Can you take questions?
We will do in a minute. We'll ask Jim.
Thanks. Oh, thank you. Oh yeah, I've got some pictures. Okay, thanks. So my work mostly focuses on children's lives in public, so in streets, parks, public spaces. I haven't had a strong focus on adventure playgrounds. I've never worked on an adventure playground. My daughter, who's now in her mid-20s, has never regularly attended one, although here she is at Battersea Playground, circa 2006, possibly. And I don't know what it's like to be a child who grew up in a place where, the only safe and welcoming place they could go to was the local adventure playground. I don't know what it's like to be a parent who's only able to hold things together because their kids have an adventure playground on their doorstep. And I know that there are hundreds and maybe more of such children and families even today in London. But I have more than a passing interest in adventure playgrounds. I've visited over 25 all over the world in the past couple of decades, as well as Battersea, which is quite a highlight, and some others in London. I've also visited the absolutely breathtaking Henegi Play Park in Tokyo. I'd need a whole afternoon to do this justice, but the one key thing is it's completely unfenced. Okay, this is just sitting in the wider Henegi Park, but it's a staffed space. And I visited Emdrup, the world's first adventure playground in Copenhagen, founded while the city was under Nazi occupation as a kind of oasis of childhood freedom. There you go. And also visited some other playgrounds in Copenhagen. This is Rødve, Rodovre, where I found myself being given an impromptu tour of the site by local kids. So I'm a fan. And in fact, I wrote about them in The Guardian about 12, 13 years ago. And it was a piece that was prompted by the threatened closure of Battersea Park Adventure Playground. And here's a quote: "Their dizzy, messy, low-tech architecture is at its best a glorious dreamscape inspired by the collective memories of past free-range childhoods. Add skilled play workers and the result is a place where children can leave adult anxieties and inner-city realities behind. And in the words of trainer Penny Wilson, it says here, learn to live creatively." So these visits have shown me, amongst other things, that there are actually quite a lot of different models or varieties of adventure playground, or at least what people call adventure playgrounds, than you might think. So, if you like, you can think of it as a sort of almost like a family tree, and the trunk of the tree is, I think, the open access, free at the point of entry model sketched out earlier. But there are lots of variations. Denmark now, and for some decades, effectively the playgrounds there are a form of childcare. So parents have to pay, or they're subsidised in some way. You have what you might call inclusive play, play for specialist groups of children. The kids' playgrounds here in London, the Markfield, the Yard in Edinburgh. You have sites that maybe have a focus on outdoor adventure or on nature, urban growing projects. So a month ago I was in Jugendland in Amsterdam, which is both of those things. There's also a nature play space in Rotterdam called Speeldernis. That there are unfenced sites like Henegi and also Playground NYC that you're familiar with. There are sites that kind of have a wider sort of part in the social safety net of local communities. And there are some adventure playgrounds that sort of see themselves as a kind of play resource for the wider community. And I suggest that some Hackney's playgrounds might be an HPA, Hackney Play Association, as an example, where you've got design expertise, programs running off-site, maybe some awareness. So there's actually quite a number of different models. Of course, adventure playgrounds are also the site and genesis of radical ideas of playwork, but I'm not going to go there, partly because Penny already has. But what I am going to say, and this is where this conversation might get interesting but also difficult, is that I think some of the very qualities that make adventure playgrounds so special also kind of make it quite hard to make the public policy case, precisely because they are such rich and wonderful places for children, I think they raise some tricky policy questions. So hear me out, and actually the kind of context for this is, it's moving from the sort of visionary, inspirational magic territory that we've been in, and down to sort of some hard-nosed questions about harsh economic realities and fairness and equity. So the average adventure playground in London, it's hard to get hard figures, but maybe might cost £120,000 a year to run. That's probably my opening bid was quite a lot higher than that. And that's assuming a peppercorn rent, so there's an implicit sort of extra amount there. The value of land is a serious issue, and we know that, and it's a complex issue. It's too complex for me to go into here. But at very least, it means that politicians and decision makers are going to be keeping a pretty close eye on numbers and usage levels. So how well used are adventure playgrounds? Again, sort of various figures around. My guess is that a popular adventure playground might get 200 visitors on a busy period, much fewer at quieter times.
Do you mean per day?
Yeah, and a reach, so people who come at least once, of maybe 500, maybe thereabouts. Okay, so let's place that in a wider context. Let's think about Lewisham. Lewisham has a child population, children under 15, of 62,000. About 1 in 6 of those are also deemed to be disadvantaged, so children in poverty. That's a shocking statistic in itself, but again, one I'm going to park. We know that it is those children, about 10,000 or so, who are living in the worst areas, are in the most need, and who would most benefit from good play opportunities. So here's the issue about kind of public policy case for play, and I'm going to put it in a fairly forceful form. How do you make the case for the few hundred kids who are lucky enough to live near an adventure playground to get what you might call a kind of Rolls-Royce play experience when there are thousands of kids in the same borough and hundreds of thousands across London who do not, who are equally deserving? Some may disagree with even phrasing the question in that way. I think that's a legitimate and important question. And it's made sharpest by the threat of closure. And Harriet's written about this. If you like, closing down the adventure playground and replacing it with a conventional fixed equipment playground. This has happened in London. It's happened at Holland Park, it happened at Battersea Park, it's on the cards in other places. So, how do you build a case for adventure playgrounds? That's a really big question. I can only begin to sketch out some answers here. Now, one answer is, I'm going to give 8 possible models, if you like. There may be more. Almost none of these models are explicitly framed around this sort of fairness question, but most of them do point in that direction. I mean, one answer is it's a non-answer. It's sort of, we have to, so it would be an answer, say, for an existing playground. We're doing the best for the children that we have, and we can't really take on the challenge or the question of what's happening anywhere else. So it's a sort of what we have, we hold. We're doing good work, we're supporting our local families. That's a legitimate and understandable position, but it doesn't answer the equity question, the fairness question. Second model, you could call it kind of junk playground model. It's okay, let's try and reduce the cost. Let's figure out, just ways of keeping the costs a lot lower. So that might be Playground NYC or the Heneggy Play Park. And still, there's some significant costs, but that's one sort of way forward. Low tech, maybe reliance on volunteers. Third model, you might call a kind of targeted model, sort of inclusive play, saying actually we're going to focus on this client group, typically say disabled children, but then it's very hard in my experience, again others will maybe disagree, to keep hold of the idea of open access there. It almost has never happened. You might have some siblings coming along, playing alongside their disabled siblings, but Fourth model, the kind of play resource model that I've pointed out from Hackney, where as well as providing this services on site, you also have a whole bunch of other things happening that depend on that agency. So school street programs, play streets, sessions in schools, or supporting schools to develop a play offer, play awareness, play literacy, maybe stuff focusing on parental skilling up, research. Then there's the kind of multi-tool model I call. Where are we now? 5. Holiday activities and food is a good where you're building in things that are not strictly speaking about play, but they're taking advantage of the focus of the site, or nature or outdoor education. And there's a fair few adventure playgrounds that are going down this route. Then there's the childcare model that I mentioned. Again, a different way of abandoning the open access ideal. And there's a variant which you might call the pay and play model, where you still try and keep some open access play, but you also open up the site for things like children's parties or special events. And then finally, there's the sort of what you might call the heritage model. And I'm not being flippant here. I think there are some adventure playgrounds with long, honourable histories that actually deserve preserving, and their contribution to childhoods and to ideas about children's play being recognised. And that actually, the UK was one of the places where adventure playgrounds kind of grew and thrived and took many forms. And I think we need to celebrate that more. Now, these are not mutually exclusive models. There are probably other models that I haven't thought of. I'm not going to pick any of these out from any of the others. That might be something we can talk about. But I do think it is no longer enough to just make the case for adventure playgrounds through them being wonderful places to play. Okay, to steal a quote from William Morris, grew up where I live in Walthamstow, one-man army against sort of free market injustices, fierce defender of creativity. I do not want play for a few any more than I want education for a few or freedom for a few. Now, I think there's quite a lot of romantic and even magical thinking about adventure playgrounds. And I get where that comes from, I really do. But because at their best they are magical places. But I think a dose of reality is needed. And this is what I've tried to give here. And I hope you will take that in the constructive spirit in which it is offered. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this gives a good foundation to go into a discussion about adventure programs. So first, just quickly, if anybody has any questions or clarification.
A comment. Why didn't all the adventure playgrounds get together after Living came out and was so well received to approach the Heritage Foundation for a joint funding program for all of them together?
Several attempts to do
Sorry,
that.
after what came out?
The film Living with Bill Nighy, who
Yes.
worked for the London
Got it, yeah.
Council to. It wasn't
Well,
an adventure playground though, was it?
I mean, I think one of the things, I'll cut to the chase. I think one of the failures of the adventure playground movement is to not build a strong national network. Most forms of sort of charity or models of provision, city farms, youth services, have got a sort of national umbrella body of some kind. There have been many conversations over the decades about setting one up. It's never happened. I think that's a big problem, and it's only going to get worse. So it needs to happen.
Is that something London Play could help with?
At the moment we've been surveying adventure playgrounds across London to find out what their concerns are with the idea of trying to put together a proposal to a big funder to help support them. So, and part of that is trying to improve the network between and among adventure playgrounds so that they can have a peer support type of network. Obviously, we're just hampered by our own capacity constraints, which are significant. But yeah, we're kind of aware that that's something that would be really useful. There was a big issue around insurance not that long ago, and we thought that could potentially be a role for London Play to kind of act as a sort of umbrella organisation that sort of sorted out insurance and other things. So yeah, it is something that we would love to be able to.
So before we go, can I just check, are there any more questions rising out of contributions? Then we'll go into conversation.
Yeah, does anyone have a feel, maybe you have a bit of a feel, around the actual extent across London? In terms of across all of the boroughs, which boroughs do have a number, which boroughs may not have any at all? Can we quantify at the moment, or is it possible?
We've got a fairly good idea of that, yeah. I mean, Southwark has been decimated. I think there's been some sort of like disaster capitalism has gone on there post-COVID, and what someone mentioned about managed decline has happened in a couple of cases in Southwark where they've just said, oh, we're just closing these to kind of repair them, and then they're never going to open again. So yeah, we think there's about 70 playgrounds across London now, and I think around 6 have closed since COVID from our.
And shortly, oh sorry, Hannah.
No, sorry.
Not you.
No, finish.
I was just going to say that I'm part of the Playwork Foundation, and the Playwork Foundation, in conjunction with Play England and Nick Conway, have been putting together a complete listing of adventure playgrounds that are remaining within the UK. So that's when it's available, I'll share it.
Is Rob Weaver involved in that as well? Because he did a report, this Play in Peril thing, where he did.
That's adjacent.
That's adjacent. Okay.
I just wanted to say before I forgot about the importance of there being a body that really stands for adventure play in a very clear way, as we are a network. The Guardian has a Christmas fund that it gives out, and I suggested through someone on the panel that they make adventure play for the year that youth was the theme, and they decided not to, and it would have been quite a lot of money because they couldn't work out who they would have given the money to, and it all went to the National Youth Service or something, and I thought it was such a shame. But my husband was on the panel and said he was trying to say, well, adventure playgrounds, trying to explain what they were. People didn't quite get it, who would be the body who would distribute the money in it. So there's probably lots of ways in which it is damaging.
Just to throw in a comment, so as well as managing adventure playgrounds, I also visit lots across the country, health and safety inspect them as an adventure play specialist. So I visit lots of the ones across the country, and I think there's quite notably there's chunks of London ones that have just been sleepy, that have been mismanaged, that haven't been managed by play workers and play staff. Whole swathes that are really, not just the Lewisham ones, but others that could be really under risk. And lots of the outside of London's ones aren't in that position. I'm not quite sure what the stark difference is there. But I guess one thing to say is where I'm going around and visiting people, I'm trying to link people up as well on the ground. So get people talking a bit more, trying to, because the people who never get networked are the people on the ground, the face-to-face workers. So I'm also trying to bring back some social gatherings for play workers who can't afford to go to conferences and all that. So let's also start really from the ground and just be like, well, let's start by having a tea in the park or a pint in the pub, and then get managers and people just play.
What you want to do is like Louise got Kim Ledbetter MP down to her adventure playground, and she was like, wow, and she might be in the next Labour government.
Yeah. So I think it's that thing of people are wanting to pull together now. Like at National Playwork Conference this year, there was much more of a flavour of wanting to pull together than there has been for a long time. So I think the time is right. It's a shame it hasn't happened before, but I think there is about to be a bit more of a togetherness.
When's the next Playwork conference?
The national conference is usually at the start of March, and it's in Eastbourne.
Can I just say something? Have I met you before, firstly? I haven't, have I? So, with Lucian, in around about 2010, all the seniors that had all the building skills, they all kind of slowly retired or left. And the thing is, because you've got like seniors, they're full-time workers, and then you've got like the normal play workers, which are part-time workers, and there's not enough time to train up the part-time workers that are only doing face-to-face to do all the construction. So we had to get London Play in to do the construction. And, you know, it's the skills of play workers as adventure playground staff have just declined. There's no one left that knows how to do a monkey knot at the end of the rope, let alone, you know, knows how to repair a structure and stuff. And it's so sad.
And then integrate, and then you need more words. So things take longer to fix.
Yeah, because we're relying on London Play to help us out, and they've only got so many people. Like their little team is doing all the adventure playground solution.
London Play design, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like the playgrounds are just becoming, in a way, like to disrepair some of the bits of playgrounds.
Expensive for a small playground.
Sorry, there was something else you mentioned about the chain, and then the rope, and then that a playwork identifies the difference between. If you've been working in adventure playgrounds long, how we used to have it is just a rope, and it goes off, and it's really easy, it's really nice. But since the chains, because London Play's done it, they put chains, and then they put the rope at the end of the chain. To the motion of swinging on that, like I swung on it, I went flying when I went to border, because you can like jump on the rope, swing, and then jump back on the platform. But when I jumped back on the platform, I didn't realise it was like, because it's off a chain, it's like, well, when it's off a normal rope, it's like nice glide and stuff. I went flying on the other side of the platform when I jumped off. All the kids laughed at me. It was not impressive.
I think this goes also to saying that the playwork isn't just about knowing how to build structures and repair structures and maintain them. It's about how managing that whole environment, and how do you interact with the children and each other, and how do you do research and development, which is what's needed to get to the point where you can have a conversation about having an adventure play network. We haven't got, if things are similar to when I last worked on an adventure playground, which isn't that long ago, there's no spare space for talking about anything other than just dealing with the face-to-face stuff.
Because you're battling every day to like get funding in, to do your health and safety, your staffing and stuff. Because now the adventure playgrounds are only working so many hours. You don't get qualified play workers anymore, and you don't get people that really are gonna like be involved in the job for longer than a year or something, or a couple of months, because it's only a stepping stone, because it's, you know, it's no money whatsoever. Whereas before you'd be getting like at least 21 hours raised up during all the holidays, so you'd be getting enough money to survive as a living.
I feel like now is the time to give us some uplifting views, guys. The room's just like, oh, just So recently, in my visiting playgrounds all over the place, there are some thriving adventure playgrounds out there right now. They're not all done and dusted. Like the model itself isn't necessarily broken. So two that stand out are Meriden in Birmingham, and just yesterday was it long day. But the Valley in Bradford. So the things that stand out about those playgrounds, they're both new, relatively speaking, newly set up. They're not the 40, 50-year-old things that we quite often have in London. They're both, I think, Meriden is probably 8 years, 7, 10, and the Valley is 5. And so there's that new community momentum behind them, is partly one of the things. The other thing is that the Valley particularly have started with very little budget, and they are building from scratch with the children. So they just started on you should go Penny, it's amazing. They just got an empty lot and started from scratch with the children. It's some of the best kids self-built things I've seen. And now they're building up from nothing. They're a testament to their two Playworkers who did the degree at Leeds. So, you know, two really switched on people. So now they've developed it. They've got 6 on play session. They'll have 6 Playworkers. When's the last time you heard a play session that's got 6 Playworkers as standard? And because their vision is so clear and it's so fresh and they really are building it with the children, it's kind of got this very clear, and their location. So both Bradford and Meriden are located in areas of genuinely high deprivation, areas where local councils have a lot of concerns for the children and young people there, and there genuinely are very few services. So they're sort of, like Tim was saying, in terms of targeting, like genuinely parachuted in to areas where there's really not much going on and lots of concern. And then they do almost everything from your list of like different models. So they will have school groups in during the day, they'll hire it out for parties on the weekends, they've got corporate teams in that pay them and do hard labour. So it's that kind of bringing that Playwork model into, they're looking for opportunities everywhere. They've kept their sort of light on their toesness that Playwork should have, but especially where places haven't been open for a long time, or the structures have been the same for a really long time, we lose our light-footedness, and then we kind of almost get obsessed with like, how do we preserve this thing? Whereas really, it's a space and an invitation. And how do we bring it back to? So, you know, some of the issue I think with Lewisham in particular is they're massive sites, apart from Home Park, but they're massive sites and they've got ginormous, beautiful, but ginormous structures on them, which you're right to maintain that. But it's not supposed to be a museum. So it's also that thing of having the courage to be like, all right, if we are going to save these things, what we're saving isn't this exact picture right now. It's the permission and the opportunity that is supposed to be an adventure playground. And even if you have to knock it all down, even if you knocked it all down and started from a blank lot, you'd probably end up with a better play offer than if you were insistent on keeping what was there. Do you see what I mean? So I think there's vision, there's potential, and I think what we need to do is get back to our light-footedness and not get bogged down by trying to save that specific thing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
So preserve the culture of the playground.
Exactly. That's what the magic is the changingness and the potential. It isn't big structures.
And I think the kids building their own structure, really the creativity and the imagination.
Yeah. Yes, Lewisham commissioned London Play to do a report, which we did and was accepted. And one of the proposals is to change the structure, to get rid of some of the big structures and bring in much more of this building for children.
Yeah.
Well, they'll do it, I don't know.
When I emailed Chris Barnum, who's the Cabinet Member for Children and Families, to invite him, he replied and said, I can't come, but we are soon going to have some very good news to announce on this subject. But
who knows what that means though.
They also say that the playgrounds are open and functioning when they barely are, so I think there's often this positive spin.
Can I just chip in a bit of news about in recent weeks there have been discussions between the Big Swing Adventure Playground in Bradford as well. Yeah, and Leeds Beckett University about establishing an adventure playground network. And it is there, and we're talking to the Playwork Foundation is supporting various other. So it's a conversation that's ongoing.
I've got a couple of things that Ruth, when we met with you, mentioned, which was this lovely thing that Playworkers were building skills, but it was about the longevity of having a position as a play worker, and that skill share was kind of moving around the adventure playgrounds. Is that right? Did I get the right picture there?
Well, it used to be in the past when you had all the seniors that like had all the skills and stuff. So you'd have like the seniors were the ones with the skills. So like I said, in about 2010, it all kind of died out, and they used to like have the seniors move from playground to playground because they were full-time workers. So when there wasn't a session on, they would go and do the repairs from playground to playground. When Home Park burnt down during the London riots, someone set fire to Home Park, and they had to rebuild it from scratch. So a lot of the playgrounds, like at that point, started to decline slightly because it was such a big job to rebuild Home Park at that point.
And there was another thing you mentioned about when the youth, the children were coming from a young age, and then they kind of like as adults were then coming and visiting, and some who had been going
helps build the playground because the seniors had those skills. Like now we wouldn't be able to do it untrained with the young people, like as much as we want to like build and add on stuff. Like I don't think anyone in Lucian Youth Service has those skills, and insurance wise it's like a big question, like would we be able to do it, and how do we go about doing it with the young people and stuff.
And even those who were coming from gangs were coming and advising the young people, like
you get that a lot in adventure
and chosen, and like advising and acting as peers to the young people.
Yeah, because each adventure playground is their own little community with their own little personality. So with Deptford, you've got a lot of young people in gangs or know someone from gangs or will be in gangs or whatever. But you'd have like a lot of the time, 18, 19-year-olds coming back in and just chilling for whatever reason. And then, like when we do have knife crime workshops, or when the young people talk about like shotting drugs or doing this or doing that, the older young people will tell them it's not a good life, because they know that they've got respect for us, and even though they live this gang life, they know we discourage it. So they will tell the young people like we told the young people, but they're more respected. So it's like little communities and families in each playground, in each place. You get like different dynamics, but that was the dynamic of Deptford. Well, it's like when I go and work at a different playground, it is a completely different dynamic and a different community, but it stays the same. It's family, it's community. We're not like youth clubs where we have senior sessions and we have younger junior sessions. All the session is the same, and that's how you become a community, a family.
I have one more thing to share, just quick. I have a friend who's part of Frome Council, and in Frome they have adopted a model called, it's a shareholder. So the Community Benefit Society has replaced the Community Interest Group in order to access the Community Ownership Fund. And the Community Ownership Fund actually has been, if you go online, Sadiq Khan has mentioned something about Community Ownership Fund, which is a pot of money helping communities own an asset which is at risk of getting lost. So I just wonder if
we're a community at-risk space. So they've given us money, but the money they give us is to pay a consultant to apply for grants for us. That's what it is. And it's like £2,000 a year.
Yes. Some question we could move on to, but first, is there anything more to say about perhaps the network or any other ideas?
So Lollard Street, we're part of a consortium in Lambeth with the Triangle Adventure Play, so we apply as a group of adventure playgrounds for funding from Lambeth. and with youth clubs like Orford House and stuff. So we have consortium meetings.
Is Lady Adventure Playground part of that consortium?
Where is it?
It's in Stockholm.
Oh, so you're really close.
Yeah, we're in.
Well, we need to
Yes, please.
join together. And there's the Oasis as well.
Yes.
Do you work with Oasis?
No.
Is that the one that used to be Charlie Chaplin?
Well, they've got two, because the Charlie Chaplin one is for they're trying to reopen it just for disabled children.
I think it was before for disabled children.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they get special funding for that, but then they've also got Oasis got another one as well, I think.
So just across when we were talking about consortium meetings, I think part of the, particularly about Lewisham, the like logical leap of like what could possibly happen, like in terms of getting them reopened, etc. It's just like who's got enough capacity? Which organisation's got enough capacity that they could take on all of them? Nobody. So then some kind of consortium, proposing that sort of model might be an answer, because it might well be that somebody's got capacity to run one, in close conjunction with others. So that might be an interesting thing to talk about.
Our finance and everything and our staffing got so desperate a few months ago, we were thinking about closing the lottery. One of the ways, we just got a massive grant from the National Lottery, but one of the things we were considering was joining together with the Black Prince Trust that has all the old Lillian Bayliss playgrounds and sports hall, and they've got the Michael Jordan Pass. So we were beginning to talk to them to see if but then our founder of who got the playground reopened, she was very unkeen on doing that in case we lost the free play ethos, and it just became another space that's rented out and it becomes part of the culture.
Is there 4 in Lewisham that are basically not really
In
open?
Ladywell, Honour Oak are not really open, and Deptford are
No,
seven.
Honour Oak is supposed to be open. Ladywell's
It
definitely
was
closed.
never open when I was when I lived next door.
Schools using it during the day, but it's not open.
I think that they have a youth club nearby, and they bring the after-school club kids in for 20 minutes. I've seen them there, and they take them back to the youth club again.
As far as I know, they use the youth club as their main base, and they take the kids over to the Adventure Play, and then take them back to the youth club again.
I've been there when they do it, and it is really. I mean, it's like they march everyone over, and they sort of play for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and when I spoke to the woman who runs it. She said it's easier to run out of the youth club. We've got a kitchen here and stuff. That I felt there was a lack of interest in having adventure play.
Yeah.
There was a lack of understanding. That's what when these things get amalgamated, because with people that are not from an adventure play background, then people just think, well, we're running something out of a youth club. Why do we need that big, massive site with ropes and stuff? So.
With all the risk that's
associated. It's just a hassle. They're like, we got a hall with a
insurance.
football pitch, and we just run it out of here.
Richard,
Yeah, on this question of the need for a network, London-wide, national, really how that would connect with public policy issues. What would be the asks? I mean, I can see the solidarity side.
It's an identity to present to politicians, isn't it?
Hold on, I'd like to develop some points if I can.
Sorry, I thought we were having a conversation.
So I'm wondering whether adventure playgrounds can make their case in isolation, or whether it needs to be a play umbrella, and maybe you'll have thoughts on that. Because all aspects of children's play are actually very marginalised and under pressure. Maybe not so much under pressure, but many young children's playgrounds are under pressure, so that there's many of those closing as well as the adventure playgrounds. Youth clubs have been under pressure and closing for a long period of time. I'm wondering whether to gain the public attention and the attention of policymakers, the adventure playgrounds maybe need to be part of a wider play manifesto.
Isn't that Play England? Isn't that Play England?
Well, I don't know. Okay, I'll shut up then. I was going to try to develop a few points, but if you don't One minute. Absolutely.
I think Louise was just Louise was just trying to answer your question. You're right that there is a wider crisis, but you try and do too much, and then people don't know how to answer each problem, do they? But you're right that it's linked to wider playground cuts.
Okay. So Richard, we'll let you
just finish quickly. I wasn't trying to hog it for too long, but it's just my style. I like to develop a few points, that's all. I mean, the other thing I wanted to mention is that my background is as a campaigner on planning policy. So I tend to get involved with playgrounds and adventure playgrounds where they're under threat from development pressure. And turning that in a more positive direction, it makes me aware of how a number of local authorities are taking equality impacts assessments more seriously when it comes to planning and generally. And I'm wondering whether people here have experiences of ensuring that equality impacts assessments are actually taking into account all the types of issue for children and young people, because children are obviously a protected category. I don't find that they are where I'm active in Southwark, and we're campaigning to try and make them do it a lot better, but maybe there's other good examples. And then that leads on to issues around cabinet ministers, or cabinet members rather, for children and young people within at a borough level, and what they are getting involved in. I find they don't get involved in so much in what's under pressure. It's more in terms of trying to create something new. And finally, there is, in many London boroughs, there is huge development going on, and that means there is funding and there is issues around infrastructure development. And again, how far are people campaigning to try and ensure that children's facilities and amenities, including adventure playgrounds, are actually there in the strategies for how the development money is going to be allocated? Because there's lots of planning policy in support of that through the GLA, through the whole child yield stuff. But actually, it's not monitored properly, and it's not being spent and allocated, even though it's an existing policy. So I'm just floating these issues to see whether they resonate with anyone else here, or whether they could be included in a kind of strategy for actually better supporting all playgrounds.
I mean, I'll just speak for my own work. You've described pretty much the whole of my efforts, such as they are in advocacy work in the UK or in England, because it's England actually. Is around trying to get progress on those issues. I think it might take the conversation too far to dive into that, and that's my contribution here was really with adventure playgrounds in mind, and it was sort of starting with adventure playgrounds as a model and trying to develop some thinking about how they could be saved and start to thrive again. And it's really, I really want to hold on what you were saying earlier, Sarah, about outside London, the picture, or at least in some parts of the rest of the country, the picture is different. So there's a real opportunity there to figure out why that is and what London adventure playgrounds can learn from it. I do think there is a case for a wider alliance or set of asks or campaigning around play, absolutely. And historically there have been points when adventure playground advocates have been part of that. But my sense is that as a model it's just been so under siege for the certainly the last 10 years, that it's just really hard for people working in adventure playgrounds to get their head around doing anything else other than keeping their pace afloat.
Yes,
Agreed.
we're dying over here. Yes. Literally.
I mean, maybe to say the link, I know that both Louise and I are very interested in the whole issue of planning and provision of children under child yield. And where I wonder cynically sometimes is that developers don't want adventure playgrounds near their brand new estates. It's not the kind of model they want their money going to. They want a nice fixed little thing for 3-year-olds.
They're too messy.
They're too messy and noisy, and people buy this very expensive flat in Deptford. They don't want to look down on loads of kids playing.
I think
that's
actually,
the evidence we've seen on Louisa's estate. They don't like the lawn.
They want to get a lot close, my local residents, because it's noisy and doesn't look nice. They just, it's the worst side of gentrification. They've moved in with their very valuable flats, and they then they complain all the time about the venture playgrounds. And like, I get it in there, and I'm like, you moved in here next to the venture playground that's been there 50 years. Stop complaining about the children trying to get the hours.
It's like music venues, isn't it?
I think it's more complicated than that, I really do. I think firstly from the point of view of trying to get lever-in contributions from developers, frankly it's a lot easier getting a lump of cash to spend on a capital item than it is to get ongoing, possibly indefinite revenue. That's the big, I have worked with developers and been in rooms where conversations have been had about how you support children's play. And these are people who they're solution focused. They may not be the world's most wonderful human beings, but they do have, some interest in, particularly when the Mayor of London is breathing down their neck saying, what are you going to do for the kids? Which at times they have. So I think there's that. I also think there are also some contexts where, to be blunt, people living next door to adventure playgrounds do realise that the alternative to them living next door to an adventure playground might be them living forward to another high-rise housing development. Yeah. And that actually the scruffy playground is the preferable solution.
Exactly, that's how I've stopped complaining about ours. I was like, all right, well, the council can take over a little block of flats there then if you want.
Could I ask, is there a problem with local authorities owning and running or being responsible for adventure playgrounds? Is there a model which would help to resolve some of these questions?
My feeling is that it's swings and roundabouts. That some voluntary sectoral adventure playgrounds are strong and stalwart and have got good local community support, and some councils will protect their own adventure playgrounds. But as I live in Tower Hamlets, and those adventure playgrounds that were under the aegis of the council are now what you described. They're moribund. That's a great word for them.
Yeah.
They're bought from a catalogue.
So,
and I found a group of children who'd been asked to leave because they were climbing up the outside of a tower.
And also, I think the thing is, it's so Hackney. There are 2 that of the 5 in Hackney, 2 are run by the council, and the council seems quite committed to them. They're jogging along and very embedded in their communities. They managed to keep their Playwork staff, but I think also there's a risk of, if you lose your Playwork staff and then they just have to move somebody over from the sports department or from they'll just fill the gap with somebody who then is like, let's go and play in the cage over the road because I can't deal with any of that, and then it starts declining. So I think in a way, and they've got masses of red tape, so they lose quite a lot of their light-footedness because it will take them 6 months to get the approval to do some very small bit of work or whatever. So I do think the best approach is voluntary sector, and it does require some pioneers. It requires some vision and some pioneering. But it could be, it's that thing, this could be also a massive opportunity because it basically all flops or is a massive opportunity. And we have to kind of conjure that up now.
So we need to just draw the conversation to an end. We're running out of time. But I'd just like to ask first the speakers, out of what's been said, is there anything that stands out as a way forward or an indication of proceed?
For my part, I think it's a great collage of possibilities that we've talked about, and I think at this stage, just try everything. It feels like a real crisis, and as Richard was saying, it's not just adventure playgrounds, it's play that's under threat. And it's not just adventure playgrounds that people hate, it's playing children. And I feel, I was talking to you before about a sense of urgency, and I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do this stuff. So how am I going to try? What can I do with my last useful working years as a play worker to make it better? And so I'm just looking for possibilities the whole time.
Join forces.
Yeah.
Well, I really the phrase that resonated for me was yours, Sarah, about being light-footed. I think if I'm going to narrow the conversation about what's the future for adventure playgrounds, I think it has to be with that in mind. And I think, I'm sorry to say that my own impression is that in the UK, or certainly in London, adventure playgrounds have on the whole been the opposite. They've been quite leaden and recalcitrant in a bad way. Yeah, and I think that's not a viable spirit in which to face the future.
Harry?
I mean, I'm not the expert on adventure play. I hope there can be more done to raise the awareness of all of it, particularly where there are injustices. And I think councils will spend money on what there's public attention on. So we've got to keep it in the public eye.
Coming away from this, it's just like listening to everyone and like have everyone as passionate about young people as I am. It's like refreshing, because sometimes it's just like you go in and you do your job and you just like feel so alone in like battling against all the policies and all of like the funding cuts and everything like that. But it's like really refreshing to come into a room of people so passionate about our young people.
Okay, so we can come back to the end.
Yeah, I got a bit emotional there, sorry.
So shall we move around?
Yeah. Unless you want
So I just say, we did start late. Is everybody okay to go until 4:15?
I need to leave at 4.
Yeah, I don't have to go. Yes. To go on very long.
In fact, actually, Marion, I might slip out now because otherwise I'll just be interrupting and stuff. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I need to shoot off back to work
See you
as
around.
well.
What's in the next one?
It's short staff at the moment and it's starting to get busy now. Thank you for inviting me.
Can I just give you a hug? I thought you were amazing.
I read about your story and I saw it on the news and everything. Yeah.
And I really, Mary maybe put us in touch. I'd love you to come talk to our play workers.
Okay.
At Lola Street.
And also let's have a South London Playwork drinks.
Yes, drinks, like I'm down for that. But yeah, I thought I recognised you did our health and safety, didn't you? Yeah. And we was like banging lots of wood in Home Park. That's what I took away from your training. It was great training. But it was nice to meet everyone.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day. Bye. Bye.
So, would you like me to introduce you? I have the bit, or I can hand it over to you.
I don't mind. Maybe more informal is nice. I might just go into it while I'm having some grand formal intro. I feel like I am a little bit left field, so to speak. It's definitely not specifically on adventure playgrounds, and it definitely been incredibly interesting. I grew up in France, and I don't think that's really a thing, or at least definitely not in Paris, which you could imagine. But definitely a lot of themes and overlap came into it, and I think I definitely hear, and I think this is true of so many different campaigns and anyone trying to do good, and especially in this country, of how stretched we all are. But I definitely think in terms of wider thinking and how, basically the cities that we want to imagine, right? Like, this is all around urban spaces, and how do we want to picture spaces in our future, and what do we really want to allow for that? I actually found an incredible amount of overlap, and actually I just think it's around a mentality that we're all fighting for. And I think, that really is what Pan UK in general is around. So Pesticide Action Network UK is all around stopping the harms caused by pesticides. And, we work on all sorts of things. Obviously, agriculture is a massive one. And in a lot of ways, the overlaps are there too, of allowing for more messy, allowing for very different landscapes. But I specifically work on urban spaces and allowing for... the conversation actually has changed a lot, but effectively now the conversation is allowing for more weeds to grow. And I think that has an incredible amount of overlap with adventure play and just in general, how we want to imagine our towns. Obviously, there's the very depressing facts that will come around of the overlap of the safety of our children. And I think safety of children that, interestingly, in this context, urban versus agricultural exposure is not particularly better for countryside kids, but definitely in terms of urban landscapes, there's loads of other things that we're exposed to as well. So anyway, I'll go into that. But and so I've been campaigning with Pan UK for about 3 years now, and my background in general is in toxicology and exposure to various chemicals, but at the moment pesticides is the one I'm working on. I'll keep it brief, and I feel like we've all heard incredible, inspiring stuff today, so I don't want to water it down. But the idea in urban spaces is who is using pesticides is a really important thing to consider. I mean, and that might be, I don't know, I'm hoping that pesticides aren't used in adventure playgrounds to manage those spaces, but again, it's thinking, do schools use pesticides in your school grounds? That happens more often than not, I would say most of the time. Are pesticides being used by your council? Again, in London, more often than not, only 3 are pesticide free. And so it's all these different land managers that are going to be using these pesticides to remove weeds is literally why we're using these. So these are, pesticides is an umbrella term. It'll be fungicides, mossicides, insecticides, and of course herbicides that we hear more often. And so all these simply, kind of like you see in the picture, to get rid of something that's going to be considered a weed. Which is considered an issue. So where are they used? Again, this is kind of why I'm here today, just in terms of the fact that they're actually used in playgrounds a lot, and it's not something that people have put two and two together. So rubber surfaces, for example, you might not see weeds, but mosses might grow on that, or different fungi. So that's a key area where certain powders are put down. And I'm sure you'll have noticed that you've never seen a sign that tells you that pesticides has been sprayed there, but I'm very sure that you all know how kids play. So anyway, I'll come back to that. So in terms of information to have, just glyphosate is sort of 77% the most used. So it's by far the most used chemical, and very much touted as safe by certain institutions, but also by others, like the WHO termed as a probable actually carcinogen. So it is, a varying landscape with a lot of information out there. We don't have any money in the game to be telling you that it's not safe, and it's not safe. But there are big lobbies that do want to make you believe it is safe. But I think information now is changing a lot, and I think the discourse on pesticides has come a very long way, especially when you consider, the vulnerable people at risk. So more examples of what that can actually look like. More and more people are noticing people spraying. Frankly, this is a best case scenario of seeing someone wearing full PPE. This is in Lewisham, I believe. But more often you just see the results. So just these yellowing strips, this is the most just ridiculous part of it, where it's just the middle of a field and they call furniture. So it'll be the same in playgrounds, this is furniture playground, and underneath all of it, signs that it's been sprayed. It'll go yellow about 1 to 2 weeks after. So, it got sprayed and your kids played on that whilst it was there. Another crappy sign is that it rained not that far after, and all this stuff can go into the waterways. So there's a lot of malpractice, and This picture just got sent to me last week. This is in Croydon. This is someone spraying on a quad bike. This is a school sign. This is outside school. It's tricky to see, but it's sent by residents. We run a campaign. And so yeah, just to give you a bit of a landscape of where is being sprayed. But yeah, again, sort of under places kids are playing, outside tree pits. And so what do they do? Why are we concerned, really? What do they do is they kill plants that we don't want in a certain place, or certain people don't want in a certain place. But what do they do really in a world that we're currently living in is contributing to the insect apocalypse. I think is something that I feel like most people know about this more and more, but I think it's something that we don't particularly think about is the urban implications of it. London is fairly relatively good at having green spaces, but it's all those residential streets in between where you're bug, you walk 20 meters, or you crawl, if you're lucky, frankly, as a bug. You're not going these incredible distances that parks have between them, and there's these concrete deserts in between of complete disconnection. So that's, and some facts just to put in there of like a third of butterflies, hoverflies, and bees being decimated now, species that were now, disappearing. There's, very real examples, and actually urban spaces are really key in making those connections for insects. But yeah, I won't go too much into this as we want to talk about children. But yeah, environmental contamination, again, these pesticides being, running off into waterways directly. Actually, inner borough London has water catchment areas. Outer borough London, which is something I only learned about the other day and is very unknown. Water runoff from streets, from everything, goes straight into local rivers. There's no catchment. So you're spraying, that's going into waters if it rains the next day. And we have a wonderful country where it rains randomly, most days, frankly, or just a little bit, but that will be enough to actually run it off, and that won't necessarily be planned in your weather report. And then, why we're here really is the human health effects. I think, there's a lot that we're dealing with living in a city. We have air pollution, that's a huge issue already for children. There's so many things that we're already dealing with. Why are we exposing ourselves to something else? Why is it something else that we have to worry about when we know that it's completely unnecessary? We're talking about a few weeds here, and there's lots of alternatives. So again, something that I'll go further into. But in particular, children are a lot more vulnerable, as usual. So why are they more exposed? They're more exposed because of their behavior. They're curious. They're going to be on the ground. They're going to be putting things in their mouths. I think it's worth looking into for adventure playgrounds, but in terms of standard playgrounds, for sure, a lot of these will be sprayed. And, all the metal bars, all these things will go into kids' mouths or on their hands back into their mouths, into the grass below. Anyway, so all these, great behaviors that we absolutely don't want to stop and rather encourage are also the behaviors that are actually putting them at risk. Unfortunately, they absorb pesticides more easily, so their skin, obviously a child's skin is actually still developing a lot thinner and still, just a slightly different makeup, and that actually has more exposure. I'm reading this here and also off my paper, but they also breathe more, which it sounds kind of nitpicking, but actually a child breathes something like 12 times more in a breath than an adult, and actually I've just had a terrifying study of how much glyphosate is actually in the air on a given day, even if it hasn't been sprayed recently, and that will coat their lungs more. It's just that slow increase intake, which actually means more exposure. And their systems aren't that developed. So, we do have, as adults, a little bit more resistance there thanks to our livers, thanks to different systems, but kids don't have that yet. So between this increased exposure of their smaller size relative to how much is being sprayed is worse. Their behavior in itself is going to lead to more exposure. So all these little things actually lead to little amounts of exposure, which I'm sure you can figure out with chemicals. Small amounts doesn't equate safety. Small amounts is just as dangerous, especially with things like endocrine disruptors. So what does this really do in terms of, again, people who are most likely to be in these spaces for children and pregnant parents? It's the chronic element of it, this repeated exposure. We're seeing kids that are growing up in cities having way worse levels of asthma. Again, glyphosate and pesticides contributes to that massively. We already have road issues and pollution from there. So it's thinking, how do we remove some of these factors. But yeah, neurodevelopment outcomes, cancer risk, adverse birth outcomes. So yeah, preterm births and lower birth weight in particular was a study associated with glyphosate. Developmental effects, hormonal disruption. So all the things that frankly we're seeing slowly evolve in our society of issues in children and generations to come, effectively. It's incredibly hard to have causation. It's incredibly hard in the way that our societies are built, right? That we're exposed to so many different chemicals to say it's specifically that one. But slowly more and more studies are coming over the years that are showing that causation. And frankly, beyond having to prove it to that point, I think knowing that there are possible risks that have been shown, why take that risk? I mean, the UK, to a certain extent, has the preventative approach to chemicals. You know, we don't allow some of the worst ones, but why allow any risk when, you know, we already have so many other things going on? So yeah, reinforcing that risk, yeah. So a nice quote from a geneticist at King's College London: exposure to pesticides during critical periods of development. Anyway, you can read it. But it is crucial that we prioritize reducing pesticide exposure in order to protect health and well-being. This is a photo taken from Brighton that has gone pesticide-free, but some of the schools haven't. So this is a school, and right there under the furniture spraying that's been done. So it's not because your borough is pesticide-free that some of the schools are. Very quickly, you know, glyphosate is allowed, but again, it's been told that it shouldn't be used in sensitive areas to minimize use in public spaces like parks, public playgrounds, and gardens. So it was allowed by so little in the EU. It's now actually banned in a lot of EU states. So France, for example, is completely banned, but the UK is very much falling behind in making these decisions. So we're pushing for a national ban, but you know, we're also taking the approach of the domino effect of having lots of little places go pesticide-free, ideally London as a whole. So again, yes, this messaging of why expose our children to this unnecessary chemicals. You know, it's just changing mindsets. Really, it's just thinking we want more messy. You know, we want in certain areas for more weeds to grow. We want our children not to be exposed to these terrible chemicals. Obviously, trip hazards, things like that need to be removed, but there's very effective alternatives that exist. I don't go into them now, but there are a lot of chemical-free alternatives. That's the least of our worries. And yeah, celebrating local biodiversity. In terms of children, it's a real opportunity to get them involved. My friend is a Montessori school teacher. A lot of that approach is around, you know, getting kids to actually learn about biodiversity that's growing on their land. So yeah, reframing the conversation, which needs to take place on a borough level, because it's not just schools, obviously, or schools that are managed by councils, playgrounds that are managed individually or by councils, but getting that change as a whole, thinking of our spaces for more wellness, for more curiosity, right, which is what play is all around. And yeah, some of the key messages, just public support. I'll leave it at that, but I like this really great example of Daubeny Fields, which is in Hackney, that explicitly said they went pesticide-free and that we're working with their kids to see all the different biodiversity that's growing there, and just under their, so you see it's like the same furniture that we saw again repeatedly sprayed in other places here. They're just like, well, look, now we have really cool blue-eyed speedwell, chickweed, and red dead nettle and groundswell growing in this one area. And actually, what an incredible opportunity to just learn and see what's there. And in terms of biodiversity, it's actually putting all the small residents first, so children and insects at the forefront of these decisions. So yeah, again, like getting these spaces integrated for all these curiosities. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So, any questions or thoughts about it?
What evidence is there for the impact it's having on children?
There's a lot of different studies. Yeah, I wasn't going to go into too much of the
there is an
detail.
evidence-based.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, this isn't fear-mongering, unfortunately. It's a lot of different studies in terms of drift, in terms of that putting into their mouths. So, I'm happy to send them. I didn't want to write them all out by hand, really. But yeah, there are quite a few of them Norwegian, actually, American pediatrics associations published quite a few things like that. But so something I didn't mention again is some countries have gone fully pesticide free, for example. So France no amenities use is what this is called. So like amenity is anything that's not to do with agriculture. So all of that is banned in one fell swoop. So that was at a national level. They're just like, this is unreal that we're using pesticides for this. You know, bearing in mind that this is something that we've been doing since what, the 70s, the 80s. It's not something that we've always done.
But you notice Britain's Got Talent, the advert in between all of them, I've been watching with my kids, is for pesticide.
Really?
It shows all these really smiley little daffodils, not daffodils like that.
Dandelions.
Dandelions.
Oh, yeah, it's a grind or something.
Oh my
Roundup.
God, the advert on this family TV show.
That's glyphosate.
And even my kids were like, oh, they're in, it's like, that's what they're.
That's so interesting. That's killing
right in the advert.
dandelions. Yeah. Whilst exposing so many people to that crap. Yeah.
What are the 3 boroughs? Which are the 3 boroughs?
So Lambeth is pesticide free. Hammersmith and Fulham. Lambeth just recently, and they're doing incredible work in terms of that sense of rewilding and allowing for more weeds. Hammersmith and Fulham and Westminster.
So you mentioned that even if a borough is pesticide free, schools could still use them.
So the wonderful way that this country is organized and sort of the, years after years of just things being piled on, which I'm sure anyone trying to get any policy or change made have realized how complicated it is. Every borough is different and no one borough has the same jurisdiction. So some boroughs, schools are managed by them, some boroughs are not, or some have schools managed but not the grounds. Yeah. Some parks are green flags, some are not. So it's just, but the best thing one can do is trying to get land managers together. So not just the council, but getting the council and getting school grounds and getting all these people actually speaking together so that they can start making sort of a sensible approach to things. But again, I'm sure you've realized how little sense there is to these things. But yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean that all school grounds, for example, are pesticide free in Lambeth. But it's worth checking in. And it's often just the case that people just didn't know better. And this is how it's been done. No one's ever said anything. But public attention is a very good tool. And for sure, when it comes to parent groups being worried about their kids, change actually tends to happen quite quickly for schools. And it's a lot easier conversation than a borough-wide change, of course, though that's possible too. And frankly, necessary in just a matter of time. But in terms of immediate things that you can do, playgrounds in schools is quite a easier push. It's just that no one's ever pushed, kind of thing.
I just literally discovered last summer, because I was going to the community gardens on a volunteer day, and they were literally just openly spraying, and I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
I had no idea, and I'm actually quite conscientious about these things, and I had no idea. And that's when I actually went to a meeting, and Emma was speaking, and so I've just been learning since that experience about this. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's weird to say you're lucky if there's a sign up that tells you something's been sprayed, because it's children, it's pets as well, pets in particular, there's loads of cases of poisonings. It's kind of coming out now of like dogs in the same way. Dogs, feet in the ground, feet in the grass, and then licking their paws because their paws are burning a little bit from the glyphosate maybe, and then signs of poisoning like vomiting and things like that. I mean, it's less common in children. They have a little bit more resistance, but I certainly wouldn't want my kid playing in a place that's just been sprayed, and they often do it before it's been opened or before anyone's there. So
good weather, when it's good
yeah,
weather
when it's good
well.
weather, when you are most likely to be out. So it's horrible, for sure, but also something that definitely can change quite easily in some ways. It's like a low-hanging fruit in terms of campaigning. Yeah. But there are lots of good stories of it changing. I think there's just places where you never think it could change that have changed, like New York, which I think is like the least environmentally conscientious place. They're like Central Park is pesticide free now, and it actually was led by a campaign of kids who were saying, I don't want to play in a place that's doused in chemicals. So yeah, getting kids involved in that is a really strong approach as well.
Do you have data or information about what's happening at a local authority level in terms of the spraying of the play spaces? Because those 3 boroughs
No.
Can we actually say that the play spaces in those boroughs pesticides aren't being used there?
Well, it depends. So yeah, we have data on whether playgrounds that are managed by those managers will have that information. If that makes sense. So if it's managed by the council, then we'll know, and you can know through freedom of information requests. Like that would be more accessible. It's just when you start getting into the nitty-gritty, this is why it's better to actually speak to people who are there on the day-to-day, who can just pop out an email and say, are you using pesticides to manage this space that isn't managed by councils, for example?
Sure, but what do you know at the moment? Because I haven't got time to do loads of FOIs really. Is there any data set that you're aware of?
Yeah, we have a London-wide FOI. We actually did do that work and say specifically if playgrounds are being sprayed or not. But again, that will be playgrounds that are managed by those people. So it'll be X amount of schools, or it really depends. And it won't be into the nitty-gritty of which schools or which roads, or we can't go that detailed. Though, frankly, a lot of councils don't know themselves, which again I'm sure you realise. But yes, we do have a map of London effectively, where you can click on your borough and see what the situation is, because some boroughs, they're not pesticide free as a whole, but maybe their playgrounds are, maybe their parks are. There is some awareness there. It is more nuanced, so it's worth checking out.
Could you send a link to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's information general.
So in the last 10 minutes, could we just think back over the day, and maybe just everybody who wants to make a comment about what you think we can do as a next step, or any thoughts or something that struck you, that stood out?
I like Sarah's description, as I'm going to go back to Sarah, with an adventure playground as a space and an invitation, and I think that's a big takeaway, and kind of idea that it's not a museum, we don't need these giant structures, and we give ourselves a bit of leeway to think about them in different ways. As you referred to in our Lewisham strategy, we started talking about horizontal playgrounds and less obsession about. Kids do love to climb.
If you start from scratch,
Yes. Yeah.
Richard, we'll just go around quickly. You can pass it on.
I found it a bit difficult, as you could tell, because I'm not intimately involved with adventure playgrounds. I come to them as part of overall campaigning work, and I've made some very useful points from today which I can use in my campaigning. So it's a definite plus. But I'm also left feeling there's a bit of a silo group here, and I'm wondering about whether anyone here feels there is a benefit in actually connecting more strongly, with wider groups in society.
I imagine most people here are connected. I mean, I know that I'm interested in particular planning you mentioned, something interests me. I think we were just focusing on it because it's what the focus of the meeting was, I suppose. But I think there is, I believe that adventure playgrounds as in themselves, I thought Tim's constructive criticism was really interesting and useful, and it's really important to take on board that stuff, but I think we do need to be defended because they are very special, and they're like the last little wild free spaces for kids, and they're special in that regard, and they need a special attention.
What Sarah had to say made me think, instead of always asking, chasing grants, we need to build community and our volunteer base, because within them we can build things, maintain things, instead of subcontracting to an expensive third party that eats up huge amounts of our operating budget. So that's a good area to go back to. And I wish that, Ruth could visit every adventure playground and motivate the young people who are on minimum wage or basic living wage to see, what a life's work and contribution this is.
I've been I've obviously had low points here, but I think generally I'm really excited that there is the passion for adventure playgrounds. I think at a time of mental health crisis amongst young people, adventure playgrounds have a lot of the answers, risky play, community, and it's just, I work in Westminster, and I found Tim very useful about how we sell it to MPs. I think we need to get the MPs and our constituencies out into our playgrounds and start fighting for them. I think we need to do a lot more advocacy in Westminster. I think we should be looking at the potential Labour government now and focusing and trying to get potential Labour government ministers interested. Andy Burnham and Ed Balls were massive advocates of adventure play before '97. Tim wrote the manifesto. I think it's just been lost in these 13 years, and I think there is a future. And I'm really excited by these people here today. I really want to introduce you to our Playworkers. I do think between us we can fight for this.
So this,
I'm soaking it all in. I think I take from today, so definitely since I started Playwork 12 years ago, all I meet is people that want to meet more Playworkers and have opportunity to do it. So I think today is like, yes, cool, doing the sort of networking thing I'm trying to do is worthwhile. And also, the playground I manage is standalone voluntary sector, and we were thinking about, can we twin, can we whatever, so maybe we can talk at some point. Just shoring ourselves and each other up and trying to hold space for strategy. Because we're the people that are sort of stuck in the mire, and also the people that might have some kind of solutions if we had a minute to think about it. So let's have some conversations around that. Yeah.
It's kind of like gorillas in the mist, isn't it? For all of us, it's like holding on to the remnants of the things that are beautiful. And how do we protect those? And that felt such a lot of synergy with what you were talking about. I often use the expression that we're trying to rewild play.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it does feel like there's another part of the same. We are trying, so my work is going out and taking play out and working with families and trying to spread the word about the importance of playing that way. That doesn't mean that, I think adventure playgrounds should just go to the wayside, because I don't. So that's my bit of the rewilding. And I think that the other thing that we have to build on this network, and part of doing that is being through the Playwork Foundation. We have a weekly reflective practice session that's online and it's open to anyone. So that's another resource that's there for people to use. That's particularly the Playworkers, because the Playworkers have such scarce resources for their own nourishment and reflective practice. So that's. Oh, and also, how soon can we get this, the recordings of this? Because I know it's just the right time for this conversation to be shared.
My research for today, I found two pathways that are potential for protecting adventure playgrounds. One of them being leveraged in Islington. So in 2010, is that in a
the question is, when will the recording be?
Oh, sorry, the recording will be available as soon as possible.
What we're doing is we're making a 3-minute video with the help of what's your organisation called?
Brand Culture Video.
Yeah, they've offered to help us to produce this video, which is promoting adventure playgrounds And we'll use part of the contributions from you to make it. So if you have any special points you'd like us to bring into this video, please get in touch.
If you need a location, come to Siôn Gardens.
Come
Loads of
everywhere.
wildflowers, go everywhere.
Thank you.
There's loads of videos on Twitter at the moment. It's that London Play that's doing. There's an amazing Twitter account that they keep interviewing young people and telling them how.
That's the mental health awareness,
No.
mental health awareness week one.
I think they're all in happening.
No, some of the London Play stuff from Hamilton, wasn't it? Some of the mental health
No,
awareness.
it's a special. Sorry, carry on, everyone.
So this video will be used to send to politicians, but it's available, so we can send it to you and you can put it on your website. Or
So is there a chance to have the raw footage that isn't edited?
Yes, there is a chance.
That would be useful.
That would be very useful.
Sorry, my apologies, I didn't realise that was a question for me. But very shortly, Islington, following a community campaign in 2010, Islington Borough Council entered a deed of dedication to protect all 12 of their adventure playgrounds in perpetuity. So that's one pathway that borough has leveraged. Secondly, it is possible to register an asset of community value. Pubs, playing fields are examples of these, playgrounds as well. That's another pathway that protects that asset in a number of ways. And that a community group, for example, would be an eligible applicant for that. Thank you.
Register with who? Where?
The community asset of community value, that initial registration, the application would be through Lewisham Borough Council or the relevant council, and that would lead to a process that would then place a restriction to the land registry in relation to that land.
So, any other comments? Sorry, Emma, what's your...
I feel like my talk was really interesting, sort of the beginning of it. But yeah, I mean, kind of what you said, just that it just feels like a general mentality of impoverishing that sense of curiosity and play and wilderness, effectively, the ability to find something unexpected in a space, which, yeah, may be an adventure play or literally your doorstep. I think it's the fact that that's taken away from us, literally stripped away is something worth fighting for in whatever capacity that is, or against, fighting against.
I think on the same note of that is the mentalities, and what you mentioned earlier was that I've heard that in Hackney there's a community who moved into a set of buildings, and it's by the marshes, and then they complained about birds noise.
Yeah, all the bird boxes are gone.
You know, it's just kind of, it's such an unusual mentality. So I feel like that's in part to do with it, is that changing the perspective somehow.
Well, it's the neat and tidy.
Building diversity, rewilding, and the spontaneity, and that it's safe, it's okay.
There has been some press about the hollowing out of families in central London recently as well, and how they're all
there's no more
able
families.
to, schools are closing, and I think that rise of intolerance towards children in central London is probably linked to that demographic shift that's taking place.
Yeah, just how unfriendly these spaces are. Just everything is square, linear.
So, sorry, but we need to come to close. So, can I suggest that if you have any links or suggestions or anything, that you send it to me, and we'll get in touch with everybody, and say in a week's time or so, with anything you send us. And if you've got anything that you guys can do, let us know.
Thank you. Thanks for organising today.